I just realized I was muted. Welcome, everyone, to the August meeting of the CCC TUG. Hope those AI-generated Britney Spears parodies got you in the mood for Gimme Gimme Moore design. We have a great agenda today. We'll go into that in a minute. But first, just want to introduce us as the TUG leads. We have Kimberly Coots here from Miracosta College, Sam Homeyer from Everett Community College, and me, Lisa Truscott, also from Miracosta College. And you might be thinking Everett Community College. I thought Sam was from San Bernardino Valley College. Well, we want to give her a big congratulations because she has been promoted to Director of Institutional Research at Everett Community College. And she is going to be a Pacific Northwesterner very soon. So Everett is not in the CCCs, but Kim and I have grown fond of her. We're going to keep her on our CCC TUG leadership team. So
Can't get rid of us.
what's that, Kim?
She can't get rid of us.
No, she cannot. She's stuck with us. So we're very excited and happy for her to be moving up in the world. So congrats, Sam. In terms of our agenda, we have a couple of quick Tableau-related announcements. And then our friend from the Chancellor's office, Chris Ozuna, is here to give us some Tableau updates from the CO. We also have Brian Moore, Tableau visionary, talking to us about some design best practices in Tableau. And then we have our very own Sam giving a presentation about templates called Oops, I Designed It Again. And then at the end, we'll give you some details on our next meeting, which is going to be October 1st. So in terms of Tableau announcements, in case you all don't know, there is a new Slack workspace for the Tableau community. It's a really good place to stay dialed into kind of all things data fam. Kim, Sam, and I are all on there. There's lots of different channels on there. There's an educators one. There's things for the community projects, for events, a whole lot of stuff. So if you're not on there, we encourage you to join so you can kind of stay tapped into what's going on with Tableau. We also sent you all an email, I think it was 2 weeks ago, about the data camp that was happening for educators. It was very early for us on the West Coast. It started at 6 a.m. Pacific. So you probably weren't up watching it at that time, but don't worry. All of the recordings and resources will soon be available in that community Slack workspace that I just talked about in the channel called Topic Educators. So if you missed that and you are looking for those resources, they will be there very soon. And then lastly, just want to put in a little plug for Dreamforce in case you all are able to go. This is the Salesforce conference that's up in San Francisco. So if it's near you, it's actually relatively inexpensive for us in public education. So definitely take advantage of that discount code. I will be there. So if you do make it up there, let me know so we can get in touch. But just a quick little plug for that if you're able to go. It's mostly Salesforce related things, but there is a lot of Tableau stuff there as well. So a great opportunity to kind of learn it and connect with others. All right, that is all we have for announcements. I'm going to turn it over to Chris from the Chancellor's office. He's going to tell us what they've been up to with Tableau and some Data Vista things. Chris, do you need to share your screen?
No, I'm good. I just have a couple quick updates, but yeah, thanks for this opportunity. Couple things that we've got going on in the Tableau world. If you hadn't heard, a couple weeks ago, we released the 2.2 version of Data Vista. That's our data and metrics platform for the system. It's almost a year old. The biggest update for that is that there now are cohort level metrics for K-12 special admits. I put the link that jumps you directly into the single metric view there. So if that's something that you're interested in and seeing what kind of data is available at the system level, you can go ahead and explore that now. We had a release webinar last Thursday, which will be up. The recording should be available soon on the Data Vista website as well if you'd like to see an explicit walkthrough on that. And then the other big update to Data Vista is there's now a new interactive metric definition dictionary. This is not Tableau based, but it is pretty cool. It replaces the many individual PDFs that were the main way that you could understand the way the metrics are constructed. So now it's this interactive tool that has a database feeding it. You can search metrics by the student journeys, the specific metric names or numbers. You can still generate PDFs for individual metrics or entire student journeys if that's helpful for you to see it that way. But I do really encourage you to go ahead and explore that, especially if these are metrics that you want to use in your own projects at your local campuses. And then the last thing that I do kind of want to just tease here is we have been working on some new internal Tableau dashboards. So with Data Vista, we switched at the Chancellor's Office to our own Tableau server. That's how we're, kind of managing the infrastructure of that. But that's letting us now do some interesting, new things for us with certain programs and projects within. So maybe at a future CCC TUG, I can talk through some of those. But that's really all the updates that I have. I'll put my email in the chat too if anyone has any specific questions or need any guidance.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate these updates. And anytime you want to come and present or give a talk, please let us know because we would be thrilled to see you. Now we have the amazing Brian Moore. Brian is a manager of the data visualization and analytics practice at Clear Intelligence Incorporated in Boston, Massachusetts. He is a self-proclaimed Tableau fanatic, and when he's not helping his clients get the most out of their data with Tableau, he's having fun on Tableau Public building unique visualizations. He's also active in the Tableau community, co-leading the Boston TUG, blogging on his website, domorewithdata.com, and teaching, mentoring newcomers to Tableau. Brian's going to be doing a presentation today on design best practices, something that I know many of us struggle with. So I will leave it at that, and Brian, let you take over.
All right, thank you, Camille. Let me just share my screen. All right. So hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Brian Moore, and here to talk about best practices for dashboard design. So this presentation is about best practices, but rather than just talking about them, wanted to kind of demonstrate how to apply them in a real world scenario. So we're going to take an actual dashboard and we're going to rebuild it step by step, applying various best practices as we go. But because we probably can't do an entire rebuild in 45 minutes, I went ahead and did a lot of that work already, but I'm going to, kind of go through every change that I made and why I made it. When I was designing this presentation, I wanted to create something that was, really kind of self-contained, something interactive that folks could go back to in their own time and, probably get more out of it than when I presented it. So that's kind of what this is. This entire presentation is built directly in Tableau. It's available on Tableau Public. It has a lot more in-depth commentary than what you'll hear from me today. And there's even a starter workbook that you can download and then kind of follow along and make the changes as you go. All right, so these are the kind of key design elements that we're going to cover in this presentation. In the live version here, I'm going to focus mainly on these first four. May touch on the others a little bit if we have time, but these first four categories are going to cover probably 90% of the dashboard updates that we're going to make. But before we get started, just a quick disclaimer. So want to be clear that what we're talking about are best practices. They're not the only practices. They're not rules that have to be followed 100% of the time. They're more just guidelines to help you build dashboards that are as appealing, engaging, and impactful as possible. What I love about data visualization is it's kind of this perfect blend of art and science. Best practices are founded in science based on how humans interpret and process visual information, but how you actually apply them is much more of an art. Every project that you work on is going to be unique. There's not like one single way to design a dashboard, but knowing these best practices can help guide you to make the best design decisions possible for your unique situation. All right, so here's the dashboard that's currently being used by the sales team at our company, the Supply Closet. Our job today is going to be to redesign it. So we're going to review every single design choice made on this dashboard, determine if it's the best choice or not, and if it's not, we're going to apply a better one. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see a lot of commentary about the design choices. For every choice, there will be a what's wrong with it and how can we make it better. I'm not going to read through all the commentary because that would be boring and take a really long time, but really encourage you to kind of revisit this on your own. And yeah, I'll just kind of do my best to summarize it in the time that we have today. But really, the goal of the presentation is to introduce you to some of these best practices and kind of demonstrate how making a lot of really small changes can have a huge impact on the overall design. So for example, with this, we're going to start with this dashboard and make a lot of small changes to the chart types, the layout, formatting, colors, and a couple of those other key design elements. And we're going to end up with something like this. This dashboard isn't perfect, but it's a pretty significant improvement over that initial design. All right, so we're going to start the rebuild where all projects should start by gathering some requirements. All right, so the first step in building a good dashboard is to gather good requirements. In an ideal situation, you would meet with the end users and ask them a lot of questions like the ones listed here. So you have a pretty good idea of what questions they're trying to answer, how the dashboard is going to be used, who's going to use it, and so on. But fortunately, the process doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it looks more like this, which is just a random email from our Vice President of Sales, Claudia. So Claudia wants a new dashboard that'll let her focus on growth and decline. But rather than building a brand new dashboard, we're going to enhance our current dashboard. So it answers all of the same questions it answers today, but better. And also all of these new questions proposed by Claudia. Based on her email, it sounds like her primary concern is being able to identify when there's a drop in sales and then being able to dig in and figure out why that's happening. And we're going to start with our first design element, which is going to be chart selection. All right, so a couple of things to keep in mind when you're deciding on what charts to use for your data. First, keep it simple. Always choose the best chart for the job, even if you think it makes your dashboard boring. If you're not sure what the best chart is for the job, look it up. There are countless resources available online that'll walk you through how to pick the correct chart for your data. There's all kinds of decision trees that can help you with that. But beyond looking it up, it's good to know the kind of basics, things like using bands for total values, bar charts for comparisons across dimensions, line and area charts for comparisons over time, scatter plots for relationships, histograms and box plots for distributions, pie charts for composition or parts of the whole, maps and chloroplaths for geographic data when the location actually matters. And then there's other more specialized charts for specific use cases. So things like Sankey charts and network diagrams and things like that. All right, so we're going to go through each chart quickly here and determine if it's the best chart for the job, starting with these bands. So bands are great for displaying total values, so I think it's the right choice here. But it is important to have context with your bands. Otherwise, it's just a really big number. You don't really know if that big number is good or if it's bad. So it's important to add context. So we're going to keep these as bands, but we're going to add growth percentages versus the previous period. So month over month, quarter over quarter, and year over year. Well, let's go ahead and add those. All right. And then next up is our pie chart. So despite what you've heard, pie charts are not inherently evil. There are some really great use cases for them. This, unfortunately, is one of them. But they're really, really good when you're, trying to show the percentage of one element versus the rest of the population, and it's either a really large percentage or a really small percentage. And when the precision of that value doesn't actually matter, it's more about like the magnitude of the comparison than the actual comparison itself. But here, all we're really trying to do is compare sales by region. So for this, a bar chart is going to work a lot better than a pie chart. So let's go ahead and swap that out. All right. Now our stacked bar chart here. So these, in my opinion, are very similar to pie charts, as they have some really great use cases, but they're very frequently misused, which is the case here. With this many bars, it's pretty much impossible to compare anything other than the grand totals and just the first bar at the bottom. Basically, everything else is just kind of floating in space, and you can't really compare it to anything else. So in this case, rather than trying to cram category and subcategory to the same view, we're just going to separate those into two separate bar charts. All right, so this is better, but still not great. Unless your dimension is something continuous like time, where users would expect to view it in kind of a linear format from left to right, horizontal bar charts typically work better than vertical ones. So it provides more space for your labels, so you don't have to rotate them and hurt your users' necks trying to read them. And if you do have a lot of marks, more marks that'll fit in the view, it's a lot easier to scroll vertically using like the mouse wheel than it is to scroll horizontally. So let's just swap the axes on these and turn them both into horizontal bar charts. All right. Now onto our map. So maps are an incredibly powerful tool in DataViz when the geographic location is important, which isn't really the case here. So we have one store in each of these cities, and we typically use the name of the city in place of the store ID when we're talking about them. So even though we have a geographic data point, the goal is really to compare, across dimensions, across stores, which once again is best done with a bar chart. You might be sensing a theme here. All right, and then last but not least, we have the area chart, which is a great choice for comparing measures over time. We could leave that here, but one thing that Claudia specifically requested was being able to compare periods or months across years to see if there are any specific periods causing year-over-year changes. So technically, you could do that here. You could look at, say, March, and then go back here and try to find March. But by the time you find it, you forget what this year's value is. So it's possible, but it's time-consuming and difficult. So I'm going to swap this for a line chart using separate lines for each of the years, so those periods will line up for a really easy comparison. All right. Yeah, so just a quick review on chart types. There seems to be kind of a tendency for developers, especially early on in their careers, to try to use a really wide variety or to use really complex charts in their dashboards to kind of showcase their skills. Well, that may make your dashboards look impressive. If you're not using the right charts, your users are going to have a hard time using the dashboard, and they're going to stop using it pretty quickly. So if you really want to impress your users, you want to build them a dashboard that helps them answer their questions quickly and efficiently. All right, so now I think we have the right charts, but it's not very easy to navigate. The layout's not very intuitive. There's not really any kind of logical flow to the dashboard. So we're going to address that next. All right, so when you're laying out your dashboard, you want to sequence your charts from the highest level, the most aggregated, least granular view, down to the lowest level, or the most detailed views, so that each chart is a little bit more detailed than the one that came before it. But in order to sequence your views, you need to know how your user is going to explore your dashboard. So users are most likely going to follow their natural reading path, which in most countries is, starting at the top left, then going left to right, and then down, and then left to right, and down, and repeat. So you can leverage this Z pattern to lay out your dashboard and be pretty confident that that's how your users are going to explore the dashboard, that they're going to explore it in that order. And if you want a different pattern for whatever reason, you can use pre-attentive attributes, things like size and enclosure, to kind of trick your users into following a different path. All right, so currently all of our charts are just kind of thrown on this dashboard at random. So we're going to do a little bit of reorganization. So our highest level views are going to be the bands. So you can't really get much higher level than that. They're just grand totals. So we're going to move those to the top, starting at the top left and then going left to right. Let's move those up. The next highest level views are going to be the category and region. So these are both pretty close in terms of cardinality, or the number of unique values. And neither of them really need a lot of space. So I'm going to move both of these up to the top left here. Then next up would be subcategory. So we're going to move that up here next to region and category. And then our line chart is probably the most detailed view. So let's move that down to the bottom. It would also kind of benefit the most from having that extra horizontal space. So let's move that down. And it probably doesn't need that much space. And this chart up here is looking a little bit crowded. So I'm just going to expand this one down and shrink this one over. All right, so this is looking a lot better. So now the users will start at the highest level, and then if they need more information, there's kind of a logical flow for where they should go next. All right, now we're going to start formatting these charts. All right, so a few things to keep in mind when designing your charts. The overall goal is to provide the user with the information that they need in a way that's really easy for them to understand and without overwhelming or distracting them. When it comes to design, less is definitely more. But for example, when you're labeling your views, you can use the mark labels if you have space for them, or you can use the axis if you don't have space or if the precision isn't really important. But it's very rare that you need both the axis and mark labels. Lines is another area where people tend to go overboard. So you want to use grid lines and borders sparingly. And if you do use them, make sure that they're not a distraction. Choose a low saturation color and use thin lines, things that aren't going to distract the user. And then whenever possible, you want to sort your views to make it easier on your users and use the appropriate fit options to limit scrolling, fill the space, and to size your marks consistently. All right, so we're going to start with the labels on our bar charts. So in all four of these charts, we're displaying the mark values. So there's really no reason to show the axis. We have the exact values here. We don't really need this. It's just distracting and it's taking up space. We also don't really need these row labels up at the top here, since we have that information in our chart titles. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up by removing the axis and those row labels. And then the line chart here is a little bit different. So in this case, labeling the marks makes it really crowded and many of them aren't really readable. So here, instead, we're going to keep the X's and drop the mark labels. And then while we're at it, we can also get rid of these axis labels because those aren't really adding much value. All right, so now on to formatting our labels. So this is a sales dashboard, but there is not a single dollar sign anywhere on this dashboard. So we're going to go ahead and format all of our numbers, both for the labels and the axes. We're going to format those as currency. And while we're formatting labels, there's not really anything wrong with the bands or how they're formatted, but I think it could be a little bit more clear that those percentages here represent growth or decline by adding some up or down indicators. So let's go ahead and add those. And while we're at it, since this entire dashboard is really focused on sales growth, it would probably be pretty useful to have those indicators on all of the charts. So let's see if we can add those without these getting too crowded. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. So throughout this presentation, there are a lot of these quick tips. Since this presentation is already really long, I'm going to skip over these, but definitely encourage you to check them out on your own. So each quick tip has step-by-step instructions on how to accomplish something that was used in the redesign. And then at the very end of the presentation, there is a page with links to community resources that have even more in-depth instructions on how to apply them. So this one here is for how to add those up and down indicators using characters from your computer's character map. All right, next, let's take a look at these really thick, kind of hideous dark borders that are around all of our charts. I don't know about you, but I can't really look at any of these charts for more than a few seconds without my eyes starting to drift to the big thick lines. Also, we're already using a white background on our charts and this kind of light gray bluish background for the dashboard. So we're already going to have kind of a faint natural border. So we really don't need these lines. So I'm just going to remove them completely. All right, and then speaking of lines, how about these grid lines? So in the bar charts, these grid lines are adding absolutely no value. We got rid of the axis, so we don't even really know what each of these lines represents. We don't really need lines between the bars here. So we're going to go ahead and just remove all of the grid lines from the bar charts. I am, however, going to keep an axis line or a zero line, just having one line here at the beginning. I like how it just gives kind of a uniform starting point for all the bars, so they're not floating in space. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So the line chart is a little bit different. So here we don't have any mark labels. So having a faint grid line can make it easier for the users to estimate the values for each of the marks. So we're going to go ahead and keep the horizontal grid lines and remove the vertical ones. And then, for consistency's sake, we'll add these axis rulers as well because they look pretty nice. All right, and while we're looking at the line chart, it looks like we might not have the best fit option here. So it's currently set to standard, which is leaving all this blank space on the right-hand side here. So let's just change that to fit entire view. And the fit and everything else looks pretty good, except for this subcategory view. So you can tell by the row labels here that it's really, really crowded when we're trying to fit everything in there without scrolling. So if you have to choose between, a crowded, unreadable chart or, allowing for a little bit of scrolling, I choose scrolling every time. So I'm going to change the fit of this one to fit width, so it'll fill that horizontal space, but won't be so crowded vertically. All right, so this next one is a little bit tricky. So we have 4 bar charts here, and we want to try to set it up so that the thickness of the bars and the spacing between the bars are at least somewhat consistent. They don't have to be perfect, but right now it's all over the place. We have a couple of these really, really skinny bars. We have some thicker bars here. These ones are somewhere in the middle. There's zero consistency. But what makes this a little bit difficult is that the size of the bars can be influenced by a lot of different factors. So they can be influenced by the fit option, how how the chart is sized on the dashboard, the height of the individual rows, which can be adjusted, the size option on the marks card. So all of those can adjust the size of your bars. And you may need to tweak one or more of them to get them to be consistent. All right, so those bars are looking a lot better. Now we just need to sort them. So sorting is really important for bar charts. So bar charts typically emphasize rank, and without sorting, you're kind of forcing your users to do that ranking on their own, like mentally, which is difficult and time consuming. Sorting also provides really important context because users can view the largest and the smallest values, and then it's easy to see how any other value relates to those 2 reference points. So we're going to go ahead and sort all of our bar charts from high to low. All right, and then this is a really small thing, but I'm just going to sort the lines on my line chart so that the current year pops a little bit more. So I'm going to move it so it's on the top of the other line, and then I'm going to tweak the size of the nodes a little bit to make those a little bit bigger than the previous years, just to make it kind of stand out a little bit more, and then maybe thin the lines a little bit. All right, so we are basically done with the formatting, but there is still one glaring issue with some of these bar charts. So if you look at the values and then look at the size of the marks, they don't really align. So for example, for category, sales for office supplies are about a little less than twice as much as the sales for furniture, but the size of this bar is easily 10 times as large. That's because on this view, and it looks like this view as well, the axis is being truncated. So when you deselect that include 0 option in the axis options, it truncates the axis and it really kind of changes the meaning of the bar sizes. So instead of the size of the bar representing the absolute value, it changes to represent the difference between the largest and the smallest value. And that's just not how people are going to interpret it when they look at it. So whether you're doing it purposely or not, it can be really deceiving when you truncate your axis. So we're just going to edit those axes to include 0. Let's see this bar grow pretty significantly. Oh, sorry, one more time. All right, so the charts are looking a lot better here. Now, the one really glaring issue left is color. So we're going to tackle that next. And then we're going to be pretty much done. All right, so a few things to keep in mind when selecting colors. So first off, you want to limit the number of colors that you're using. So I know some of Tableau's color templates or color palettes have 20 or so colors, but that doesn't mean you should use all of them. Anything more than 4 or 5 is probably too many. You also want to make sure that you're using color consistently. So if you're using a color for one thing, don't use it for something different in the same dashboard, because that can be really confusing. And make sure that when you are applying color, it's adding value. So don't just add color just to make it look nice. Make sure that the color is meaningful. The color is really, really powerful, so you want to use it purposefully. And last, but definitely not least, is make sure that the colors you're using are accessible. So there are a lot of tools out there that can show you what your dashboard would look like to people with different types of color deficiency. So definitely recommend putting your designs through those simulations and making sure that you have the right amount of contrast for any potential user. All right, so this image was shared on LinkedIn by Steve Wexler a while back and used here with permission from Steve. But it's based on a concept from the Big Book of Dashboards where the authors assert that there are really only 5 different ways that color can be used in data visualization, either categorical, sequential, diverging, highlight, or alert. But even though there are, pretty limited options on how you can use it, it can still be really difficult to get it right. And our current dashboard is a great example of this. All right, so there are a number of issues here. So we have probably 15 different colors. Many of the colors are being used for different things in different charts. We're using categorical in some charts, but sequential in one chart for some reason. It's really just all over the place. The colors aren't really adding any value. They're really more distracting than anything. So we're going to go through and try out the 5 different uses of color, and we're going to pick the best one. So we'll start with categorical, and we'll use region to put on color. That's our first one here. So let's go ahead and put that on color on all of the charts. All right, so there are some positives here. We limited the number of colors to just 4, which is good. We're using them consistently across all the charts, which is good. However, we did create a whole bunch of stacked bar charts, which we already established are great all the time. And it broke our line into separate charts here, so we can no longer see the national values. And really, is region even important in this analysis? Is it the most important thing? Probably not. And I don't think any of the other dimensions would be any better. So categorical is probably not the best option for this dashboard. So we'll try the next one. So the next one is highlight. So we need to pick something to highlight in all of our views. We'll pick our top sales store, which is in Los Angeles. We'll highlight that in all of the views. All right, so this is pretty interesting. And if the dashboard was being used differently, then this would be a really, really great use of color. So this technique is called proportional brushing, and it's a really powerful tool when you're looking at the composition of sales, which unfortunately we are not doing here. We're looking at the changes in sales, and using color in this way is really not helping us do that. So this is probably not the best option either. So next up, we're going to try sequential, and we'll use total sales on color. So this is looking a little bit better, but still not sure if it's the right choice. So all the marks are already sized based on total sales, so the color's not really adding anything. This is referred to as double encoding or redundant encoding, and it can actually increase the cognitive load on your users, making it more difficult for them to interpret these charts. So I don't think this is the right choice for us. Next, let's try diverging. And since this dashboard is focused on sales decline and sales growth, we'll use the percentage change in sales on color. All right, so this is probably the best option so far, but there are still a few issues. First off, the scales are very different for each of these charts. So the color can mean something significantly different in one chart versus another. So for example, in the region chart here, dark brown represents negative 6% growth. But if you come over here to city, here we have negative 17% growth, and that's even a lighter brown. You would expect that to be darker than negative 6. So there's not really any consistency there in color. And on top of that, having a different measure on color can be a little bit overwhelming for the users because they have to simultaneously but separately kind of interpret both the size and the color of each bar, which can be pretty difficult. So I think we're on the right track, but this still isn't quite right. So what if we reduced these to just 2 colors? So one for positive and one for negative. All right, so we are definitely getting close. If we think back to the requirements we had from Claudia, her main focus was on declining sales. So what if we keep the red color for the negative growth, but picked a more neutral and less saturated color for positive growth, so those negative values really, really stand out. All right, and we have just inadvertently moved into the fifth and final type of color application, which is alert. And in my opinion, this is the winner. The only change I'm going to make is I'm going to take the color and also apply it to the percentage over here, just so it's clear what that color represents. And now that we've reduced the number of colors and it's pretty clear what the colors mean, we can go ahead and remove this legend that's taking up all this space over here. I'm going to reclaim that. All right, again, just going to skip over this quick tip, but this tip is how you can apply that conditional color formatting to just a portion of the label, but not the entire thing. So if you look at the labels, you see that the dollar values are still, black or dark gray, and then just the negative values are red for the percentage change. All right, so as I mentioned, those first four categories were really going to be the meat of the redesign. If you remember what that final dashboard looks like, this is pretty close to it. I'm just going to run through the next couple of design elements really quickly. All right, so the next one is fonts and titles. So you want to be descriptive with your titles, use them to clearly define the purpose and the scope of your dashboard and your charts. You want to be consistent with your use of fonts, either choose one font for the entire dashboard or choose, one font for your charts and then a second complementary font for your titles. You want to establish a font hierarchy. So you're using the largest font for your titles, a smaller font for subtitles and chart titles, and then the smallest font for your worksheets. And you want to make sure that you're using safe fonts, so you can ensure that the font that you picked is the one that your end user actually sees. So I'm going to go through these updates pretty quickly. I have just a couple of to make. So first off, I'm going to update our main title here. I'm going to change it so it's the same font as the rest of the dashboard, so it's the same color, so that it's larger than all of the other texts to create that hierarchy, and we're going to make it a little bit more descriptive. Let's go ahead and update that. And then going to make a similar change to all of our chart titles. So we're going to make these more descriptive, and we're going to make them a little bit smaller so that there's more contrast between our main title and our chart titles. All right, that looks good. So next up, we're just going to touch a little bit on branding. So branding your dashboard may seem like a trivial thing, but it has been shown to have a pretty big impact on how users connect with and act on the data being presented. So they're much more likely to trust the data or trust that it's accurate, and they're far more likely to act on it when the dashboard is aligned with the company branding. So most companies have a style guide with brand standards, places where you can download logos, get the exact color codes for the brand, find out if they have preferred fonts, and then if they have any existing branded templates that can be leveraged for your design, you can usually find those there as well. So again, just going to go through these very quickly. First off, I'm going to add a logo to the top left corner here, which we know from earlier is the first thing that our user is going to see up at the very top left. And I'm just going to update the colors on my title here to match my logo colors. It's right next to it. And then finally, just going to replace this red color with, luckily, our logo here has a reddish color, this magenta color. So I'm just going to make all the red bars that magenta color instead. All right, with just a few tweaks, our dashboard now aligns with the company branding. And then the last thing that I'm going to touch on is the tooltips. So tooltips are, pretty frequently overlooked, but it's important to consider them part of the design and to, really give them the same thought and attention as you would the rest of the dashboard. And the considerations are pretty much the same. You want to use them to include important information or additional context, but don't include things that aren't necessary, aren't related, or that are distracting. And if there's nothing of value that you want to add to a tooltip, just hide it completely. So for this dashboard, I'm just going to remove the tooltips completely on the bands here. So those aren't really adding any value. So let's hide those. And then on all of our bar charts, I'm going to remove some of the fields that aren't adding values, rename the field labels. So they're using like the friendly names instead of the database names. Also going to add some additional information. So up here we have year to date, quarter to date, and month to date sales, but all of these views are just year to date. So we can use this to add the quarter to date and month to date values as well. And then I'm going to clean up the line chart ones as well. So it's just the month and the exact value. All right, so those look much better. All right, so this last section, I'm gonna skip over it completely, but I would really, really recommend that you check it out on your own. It's about adding interactive elements to your dashboard, which will let you, transform a static dashboard into something really, really powerful. So the dashboard we just built, it answers all the questions that our user proposed in her email, but what happens once she actually starts using it? There's going to be more questions. So we could spend a little bit more time up front and build something interactive that will not only answer that first round of questions, but will also answer many of the questions that are likely to follow those. So I'm going to skip to the end of this section, but I'll just show you really quickly some of the ways that I made this dashboard a little bit more flexible by adding interactivity. All right, so first off, I use some parameter actions to create kind of dynamic measures so that a user can click on any of these bands to change what's being viewed in the entire dashboard. So instead of everything being year to date, so right now we're viewing everything quarter to date, I can click on this band here and change everything to be month to date. Or here to set everything to year to date. Next, used more parameter actions to allow the users to filter the entire dashboard from any of the bar charts. I also used a trick that disables the kind of default highlighting. So when you do click on a mark, you don't get that weird black bar around it or like the faded colors for all the non-selected marks. So users can just click once to filter the dashboard. So this is going to filter the entire dashboard to the West region. And then they can click again to remove that filter. Also gave the users the ability to sort the bar charts, either by sales or by growth, and they can sort high to low or low to high. So if Claudia wants to see, what things are contributing the most to drop in sales, she can sort on low to high growth and see where those problem areas are. Then finally, just added instructions to all of these sections, so it's clear that so the users know that they can interact with it and how to interact with it. Also added this kind of subtitle up here, so you can see what metric is being viewed, and you can see any filters that are applied. Because sometimes when you're using interactions here, that can kind of get lost in the shuffle. So that is pretty much it. I hope that kind of helps demonstrate how making a lot of really, really small changes can come together to make a really, really big difference in your dashboard design. And just a quick fun fact that I wanted to point out about this presentation is that this entire thing, so all of those changes that you saw, everything is built in one single dashboard. So if you look down here, you see that this is just design best practices. It's one tab. It uses a lot of dynamic zone visibility in about 200 individual worksheets. So every time you saw something change in one of these sheets, that was a new worksheet that was being displayed through dynamic zone visibility. All right. So if you do decide to revisit this presentation on your own, at the very end here, there is a page with helpful links for those quick tips. It has community resources for all of the quick tips, including all of the ones that we skipped over at the end. So the filtering and the sorting, the dynamic measures, there are links to community resources on how to implement any of those. And yeah, that's it. So thank you once again for having me. I don't know if we have time for questions. If we do, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you're not comfortable asking questions here, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I'm happy to talk more about any of this stuff.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was one of the best presentations we've had at our TUG. Yeah. And I didn't see any questions in the chat. We do have some time if some people want to ask any. There is one comment about how this is the best presentation they've seen. So I wanted to make sure you saw that one. People are awestruck. This was a very good presentation. So thank you so much for coming and presenting here.
Thank you for having me.
I have a question. This is something that comes up when you mentioned sorting it. I was like, oh, we should ask him about what he recommends for this. So we do a lot of student level data. And when you were mentioning sorting, age popped into my head, which has like a natural order, right? We age in order. So if you had an age group bar chart, would you sort that, or would you leave it to just show like 18 to 20, 21 to 25, like something like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't sort that because age is like a continuous dimension. Like people are going to expect it to go one to the next. Otherwise, it's going to be really confusing saying, all right, so this is 18 plus, and this is 40 plus. And no, yeah, anything continuous like that, I think those are the exceptions for sorting.
I figured. I just wanted to double check with a pro.
That's a good question. I've had that same question too, Lisa. Yeah. Yeah, thank you again, Brian. Where can we find this presentation? So the link to the dashboard is earlier in the chat, but let me grab that again. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, so Lisa just put the dashboard in the chat, and the whole presentation, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, is in that dashboard. Yeah.
Yep, you can click through it the same way that I just clicked through.
And then the recording will be available later too. So if you want Brian's narrations with it, yeah, that'll be available shortly. But yeah, okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions. Okay, and then Lisa's putting Brian's contact information into the chat. So if you have any follow-up questions later on, you can reach out to him there. So yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so the next part of the presentation is to talk about templates. And real quick, just because it's a lot of fun, I wanted to show you all. So this Tableau background, I had ChatGPT make it, but first I asked it to make a Britney Spears and Data inspired background. And this is what it made. So with Data and Britney Spears from Star Trek. So not exactly what I was looking for, but I think it's really funny. So I wanted everybody to see that. And then I tweaked it a little bit and I asked for more of an album cover and this is what it gave me. So a little bit better. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the presentation though. So I'll share this screen. Okay. So I'll be talking about templates and why you should use them, how to kind of set them up. And a lot of what I'll be talking about is just to save time, right? So what Brian was talking about, all of those small formatting changes, they do add up in both time and making the dashboard look really, really nice, right? I actually went through and timed myself. So, oh, and this is another thing. So because I recently switched institutions, I was kind of in this middle ground for a while. So I started working at the Britney Spears School of Performing Arts, and this is what all of our dashboards look like. So every time I make a dashboard, this is the layout and what I want it to look like, with our logo in the top, this welcome pane with buttons, and a filter pane. Our title's up here, and then we have our charts down here. Oh, thank you, Lisa. Yes, that school's logo is really good. That was also ChatGPT. Okay, so like I said, I went through and timed myself making this just to kind of see how long would this take me if I were to do it from scratch every single time I make a dashboard, right? So this is the same layout, just without the charts in the middle. So if I'm just focusing on these three things that you can see here, the welcome pane with things like the logo, the filters button, the intro text, etc., whatever else you want to include there. I have my filter pane with some filters preloaded that apply to all worksheets across my dashboards. And this is typically just demographics, right? And then the title and subtitle of the dashboard. So all of that going through, starting from a blank dashboard to this, took me about 7 minutes. So a little bit of time to get the formatting correct, the colors correct, the spacing and everything, and the sizing and the fonts looking how I wanted them to. It took about 7 minutes. There is a lot more that I do though. So another thing that I do every time I make a dashboard is format the workbook, right? So this was something Brian had mentioned to do. I typically stick with those Tableau fonts just because they're the safe fonts to use. They're not going to change if your user doesn't have them installed on their computer. And then, excuse me, this is a little controversial, but I prefer using containers. So one of the things I focus on when I make dashboards to start with is the item hierarchy and making sure that this is laid out how I want it to, right? And I rename the items so I can tell where my welcome pane is, I can tell where my charts are, I can tell where my filter pane is, things like that, right? And all of this only takes about 3 minutes, not very long, but if you add it up to the 7 minutes I had before, that's about 10 minutes now for just getting started on a dashboard. The next thing that I do every time I make a dashboard is I try to make it a little bit stronger with built-in logic. Sorry, I can't speak right now. And so part of what I do here is the calculated fields. So depending on how many of these I have that I want to see every single time, right? Oops, sorry. Because head count is a pretty common one that we're going to use every single time. So rather than remaking those calculated fields every single time, I can put that into the template dashboard. And then another thing I always tend to do is organize by folders. That's optional, right? I just prefer to do that because it makes my data easier to find. And then those parameters that tend to be throughout every single dashboard as well. Setting those up takes some time. And then the last thing I do when it comes to that built-in logic with the data is using the default properties or changing the default properties. So for example, the number format, there was a presentation I gave a few months ago that covers what I do with this private public parameter. And that the default number format is how I would hide those small data values, right? And so it's a lot easier if you put it on the default properties. You don't have to adjust it every single time you use that field. Same thing with total using. I tend to change that to minimum a lot. All of that, depending on how many calculated fields and parameters I have, can take about 15 to 20 minutes, and that's probably a pretty low estimate. So as of now, we're up to 30 minutes for every single time I want to build a dashboard. It's going to take 30 minutes just to set it up to where I want it to be, right? Oh, yes, that's a good one. Yeah, so I just named it counts. Sometimes I call it counts and calculations or something like that too. Yeah, but I like having the CC. That's a good idea in front, like of the field name. Yeah. Okay. So that's just too much time for me. I got really, really tired of doing that every single time. So what I did about a year and a half ago was I made a template, right? So this is what it looks like. And then I have some tips for you. So tip me, baby, one more time. I know Lisa sang these last time when she did her presentation. I can't do that. I'm sorry, everybody. But I tried to still bring in the puns, right? So here, what I really recommend using is the sheet swapping functionality because that will keep the format of the sheet that you're swapping out, right? So when it comes to the outside padding, inside padding, borders, everything like that, it'll keep all of that the same if you just swap sheets. And then I know you all want more tips, so give me more tips. So another thing that I recommend doing is setting things to table across or table down when you're calculating percentages. What that'll do is when you swap out that pill, so what I'm doing here is I have course modality, but instead I want location. So, oh, okay, so Annie, I will show you. So actually you don't need to set up anything for that. So what you do, how do I go back on this? So what you do is you click the sheet that you want, and then you, on the left-hand pane, you find the sheet that you want to replace it with, and then just if you hover over it, you'll see that swap sheets. So click, find the sheet, and then it'll say there will be a swap sheet button. I actually did not know that until last week when I was asking Lisa and Kim for feedback on this presentation. So yes, very, very helpful tip to know. Yes. And then, yeah, similarly, field swapping is very similar, right? So if I want to replace course modality with location, if I have that headcount percent looking at course modality, I'm going to get a bunch of errors when I swap out those fields. So if I have it to table across, I can swap out those fields and it won't cause any issues. Yeah, so these two tips are, yeah, the swapping, it was a little sad. I didn't remember that before. Okay, what is next? So the next thing we're going to go over are some toxic practices with templates. So we have some toxic template practices. Sorry, this is my favorite slide. So one thing is text as titles. I've seen this a lot in dashboards. People tend to put a text box as the title and then the sheet underneath that text box in the dashboard. For accessibility reasons, that's discouraged because the screen reader doesn't see that text box as the title for that chart. So when the screen reader gets to that chart, there's no title, and it's kind of up in the air about what that is, right? Another thing is untitled filters on the dashboard, right? So making sure that everything is labeled so people know what they're about to click on. Okay. And then Brian mentioned this earlier, keep your fonts, colors, everything consistent, right? So in your template, you don't want to have any of that be inconsistent. And then too many floating elements. I recently, since I just started a new position, I'm going through and editing a bunch of dashboards. And one of them had 18 floating sheets. And it was kind of a nightmare to put them back in containers. So yes, don't have too many floating elements. It also makes it a little difficult for that screen reader as well. Yeah. And then don't make it too busy or overcomplicated, right? So just keep it simple. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about are some handoff practices. So you drive me crazy without handoff practices. And this is from the music video. Um, so field naming conventions, right? So this was mentioned up in the chat earlier for those calculated fields. As an example, you could add CC to the beginning. And then field naming for sheets, dashboards, etc. That way, when somebody else takes on your dashboards, they can find everything pretty quickly. And then leaving comments in your calculated fields if they're not obvious, right? Some are, like if you're just calculating age group, that's more obvious than some others. So if you have some really complicated calculated fields, it is best practice to leave comments in them. And just so everybody's aware, you leave comments in calculated fields with just those two forward slashes. And then what's really nice, if you are taking over dashboards, if you're handing them off, is to create a hidden README dashboard, just that contains things about the dashboard that the next researcher would want to know. Things like data sources, methodology. Oh, thank you. Yeah. And just things like that, right? Just make sure to hide that when you publish it. And then deleting anything that's unused. So deleting unused calculated fields, sheets, dashboards, right? So in one of the dashboards I got recently, there's a sheet just called sheet 2, and there's nothing in it. So just things like that, yeah. And then the last thing I'll talk about, and if we have, I can go into the template a little bit that I made. But one of the things I wanted to talk about before I do that, that's new in 2025.2 or 2025.1 is custom themes. So let's say you have many dashboards and you just have a circus of themes going on, right? Yes, yeah. And so one of the custom themes are new, right? But it can help you reduce the time you're spent formatting the dashboards. And so I put some instructions here. So format one worksheet using the format you want. Exporting that is probably the easiest way to go about it, because it is, when you import the custom theme, it's going to want a JSON file. I personally don't have any experience with JSON files, but when I export the custom theme on the one I've already formatted, it gives me that JSON file, so I don't need to worry about it. And then when you go to import the theme on the sheet that you want, you can select that JSON file that you exported, select override, and it will show up with your new theme. Okay, so real quick, let me just, I don't know if this is gonna work because I think I only shared. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So yeah, here is the template I made so you can access this. Lisa put the link in the chat earlier. These are some standard charts that we use. As Brian mentioned earlier, that it's best to not use an abundance of different chart types, right? So at the Spears School of Performing Arts, we tend to keep it to these 6 chart types, just so our users know what they're looking at and they know what to expect, right? If we start throwing in some crazy charts, they're going to be very confused about what the data is saying. So these are the 6 that we tend to use. And then I included some layouts. And this is where, so for the layouts, this is where you would go in and do the swap sheet. And you can customize it as you see fit too. So 3 different layouts, 2 with ban bars, I guess, 2 without. And then I have an example down here that just kind of shows how you can set up a dashboard. So this is just a standard demographics one. So any questions or anything? That's pretty much all I have. I just kind of wanted to go over what you can do with a template and why it's helpful. So yeah. There aren't any questions. Do you have to edit your reading order every time? I've never actually thought about that. So I would imagine it's going to stay the same. I think Tableau's been making updates, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say Tableau's been making updates to that so that you don't have to update it every time. But I could be wrong. Yeah. And Dorothy, I can also do a little bit of research and figure that out. Okay. So if there aren't any other questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap up today's meeting. So our next meeting is Wednesday, October 1st, and we are going to be talking about dynamic zone visibility. So we'll be on the highway to the dynamic zone visibility. If you can't tell, we love puns. No, thank you, Lisa. And then we're going to be swapping, popping, and more with Jim Daner and Diego Martinez. So please join us for that next meeting, and we hope to see you all there. And then
Also, we are looking for examples of dynamics of how you all are using dynamic zone visibility in your dashboards. We'd love to have some CCC examples and see kind of what you all are using dynamic zone visibility for. So if you do have examples or you're using it in any way, please let us know. You can email us either at our school emails, at our TUG email, which I think Sam just had up. There's like 15 ways to contact us. Just let us know how, if you want to showcase some of your examples, because we'd love to have you.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. And so here's our contact information. And then how do I go back? Why isn't it? And then if you want to present or if you have anything else you want to share with us, this link here will take you to a Google Forms sheet, I believe. And so, yeah, thank you, everybody. Hope to see you next time.
Thank you for the template, Sam.
You're welcome.
And for timing yourself.
Oh, I'm not recording it. I was going to stop the recording.